Hello there. Welcome to my review of the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, Episode 1, The Three Gables. This is often named as the worst Sherlock Holmes story by the fans, so it's curious that this was chosen to be adapted into an episode, particularly the first episode of the final series of the show. The episode begins with a faux bullfight at a high society ball, followed by an argument between the faux bullfighter and the apparent guest of honour. They have been romantically involved, and he wants her to accompany him to Rome, but she refuses and has him removed and beaten up, seemingly revelling in his pain. In this brief, almost wordless introduction, we see an important dynamic established, where the woman here is clearly villainous, not just seducing a young man, but delighting in torturing him. When we do get to Baker Street, the usual calm has been disturbed by amateur boxer Steve Dixie, who is threatening Holmes with defenestration. Before Watson enters and, with witnesses, the situation calms. Dixie is there to warn Holmes off investigating Harrow on the orders of Barney Stockdale, but Holmes threatens Dixie with the law on suspicion of murder.
I had nothing to do with that. I was training. Yeah. At the bull ring in Birmingham when that boy got done.
After he's gone, Holmes explains to Watson he does have a case in Harrow. Mary Mabley has written him a letter asking for assistance, and after this interference from Stockdale via Dixie, he is now convinced to see her. We discover her grandson Douglas is the bullfighter of the prologue, and has since died of pneumonia brought on as a result of the savage beating he received. But that has nothing to do with why she called Holmes, and obviously they are unaware of the events of the prologue. Instead, her case involves a proposition to buy her house for way more than its market value, but on the proviso that it must include absolutely every single item in the home. Her lawyer has advised her against the sale, but she wants Holmes to find out the reason for this strange occurrence. As she's telling her story, Sherlock spots that they are being spied on by the maid Susan, who he is quickly able to deduce is working for whoever is behind this.
It is worth £10 to you if you tell me who is at the back of this.
Someone who could lay down £1,000 for every 10 you've got in the world.
And whoever it is a rich woman.
I see a rich man. You smiled. A rich woman.
It's great to see Holmes interrogate someone who thinks they have the upper hand, only to watch the smile fall from their face when Holmes reveals all their secrets. And Barbara Young does a really good job of illustrating that in her performance, as she becomes enraged at Sherlock's power over her.
I'll see you in hell first.
She resigns on the spot and gives Holmes more vital data for his puzzle, as does Mary Mabley's story of what happened to her grandson, which is basically a more detailed version of what we saw in the prologue. Holmes believes there is something in the house that the mystery woman desires, and having tried to secretly buy it, has tried to insert a spy in the household, and may even try more extreme measures. He asks Watson to stay with the old lady that night, and his concern seems founded when he spots Dixie and another man in the bushes near the house and scares them off. This all sets up the mystery very nicely, as we know who is behind it and what their goal is, but we don't know why, nor do we know exactly who is behind it, or exactly what their goal is. We have only a little more information than Sherlock does, and none of it is useful. As a result of his lack of information, he turns to Langdale Pike, a well-informed gossip that Watson has little time for, but who Holmes regards with affection due to similarities within their personalities. Pike is played by the wonderfully eccentric Peter Wyngarde, who we also saw in the prologue, and he is certainly a shadow of Holmes in some respects, with his craving for information, although he gathers rather than deduces, and has more of an interest in the ladies than Holmes ever expresses. He provides Sherlock with the name of the woman, Isadora Klein, a widower who inherited a fortune from her late husband and now plans to marry a duke. We then see Klein, who confirms every suspicion we and Holmes had of her.
That stupid woman Susan has left the Maberley house.
Left?
Was forced to leave, she claims, by Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Holmes returns to Pike, and it really is a role perfectly suited to Wingard as the hedonistic gossip merchant who describes himself as the good angel to Charles Augustus Milverton's bad angel. As I discussed in my review of The Master Blackmailer, Milverton acted as a kind of mirror to Holmes in that using his own kind of brilliance to hurt people for personal gain rather than help as Holmes does. Here we see that taken to the extreme antithesis, as Pike says he suppresses far more than he exposes, suggesting he uses his gossip strategically and would never dream of exposing someone's secret if it would cause them the kind of harm Milverton's information did. It's a really tough balancing act for Wingard to remain likeable, while also being far closer to one of Holmes's worst adversaries than is comfortable. It's helped by the fact that Sherlock vouches for him when we have already seen how violently he opposed Milverton, but the performance is also what really sells it.
You still owe me a favour, dear boy.
The party Pike is attending is also attended by Klein, as well as her new beau, and Holmes probes Pike for more information, but he's reluctant to say more as he warns Holmes of how dangerous Klein is.
It's deadly.
We then return to Mary Maberley's home, still watched by Dixie and co, as Mary takes Watson through some of her treasured memories of her husband, showing exactly why she wasn't able to part with them, even for a high fee.
Oh, good heavens. Have I kept that? How wonderful. Ah, they doted on each other.
We get a sense of how important some of her possessions are to her. And, unlike Klein, who treats everything as disposable, including romantic partners, she takes great care of those things that mean a lot to her. Holmes approaches the Duke's mother, the Dowager Duchess, who despises Klein and is desperate for some news that will break the engagement. Holmes can provide her with none at this stage, although says that merely being seen to have this conversation will no doubt enrage Klein. Back at Mary's, Dixie and his fellow goons sneak in and attack Mary as she is going through some of Douglas's papers. They quickly flee and Watson gives chase, easily battering the goon before Dixie proves to be too much for him. When Holmes gets word of this, he rushes to see Watson, who is the worse for wear but not seriously hurt. Mary, somewhat more frail after her ordeal, is able to explain to Holmes that she had the novel Douglas was writing that he said would explain everything. His autobiography that told of how Klein treated him and how it killed him. Luckily, Mary was able to retain the last page of this manuscript, which Klein is furious to discover.
Where is it? Where is it? Begin!
While this piece of evidence is not enough to convict Klein of any crime, had the full book been released, the scandal caused by it would have been enough to end her engagement, and ruin her publicly. Perhaps a fate worse than conviction or execution in Victorian high society. Holmes then pays Klein a visit. He threatens to expose her, and she plays the victim, convincingly. But he is not swayed by her display of emotion, and demands she break her engagement, and send Mary enough money for a round-the-world trip. For me, this final confrontation goes on for a little too long and feels like they were really struggling to wrap up the episode. They do their best to give Holmes a reason to really dislike Klein, not just for what her goons did to Douglas, but also what they did to Watson. But it's not quite enough. Had we seen more of her abuse of Douglas early on, or of other men in her orbit, as we did with the illustrious client, it might have worked better. But then that runs the risk of being a retread of that story. The scene of her seemingly enjoying Douglas's beating was well warranted here, as without it, it might have been explained away as her hired help being overzealous, and it might have made her seem more sympathetic. But that was also at the very start of the episode, so perhaps a flashback of that might have helped to sell how deserving of her fate she is. This is certainly an improvement on the original story, though. Removing some of the problematic racism and xenophobic stereotyping and giving Watson far more to do, it manages to solve a lot of the main problems with the original without deviating from it so much that it becomes unrecognisable. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite manage to resolve the ending satisfactorily for me, so this is a 3 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.